China, as we've been talking about, has long maintained ties with the Taliban. And after the group's takeover, their foreign ministry, that's China's foreign ministry spokesman, said China would have friendly and cooperative relations with the Taliban.
The Afghan Taliban have repeatedly expressed their hope to develop good relations with China, that they look forward to China's participation in the reconstruction and development of Afghanistan and will never allow any forces to use Afghan territory to endanger China. China respects the right of the Afghan people to independently determine their own destiny and is willing to continue to develop friendly and cooperative neighbor relations with Afghanistan and play a constructive role in the peace and reconstruction of Afghanistan.
The Taliban similarly has been vocal in courting China's involvement in Afghanistan's future, saying in recent interviews that China is a, quote, great neighbor and could, quote, play an important role in the reconstruction of Afghanistan, end quote. But the relationship between the Communist Party of China and the Taliban goes way beyond borrowing a cup of sugar. With me now to talk about what China has been supplying the Taliban is Chinese expert Gordon Chang. He's the author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. He can be found on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much, Tony.
And by the way, I should mention, what started in Louisiana, Hurricane Ida, has made its way all the way to New Jersey. Your internet was knocked out, and so you're in the local library there at the Clarence Dillon Library in Bedminster, New Jersey. So thank you for going to the effort to be able to join us.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, we don't have power, but we'll get power. And by the way, Tony, we'll take back our country too.
Yes. The American people are resilient when we put our mind to it. And I do think a lot of people are waking up with what we have watched unfold in Afghanistan. And it's like an onion. When you pull back these layers, there's certainly tears involved. But if we respond appropriately, we can make some corrective actions, take some corrective actions. And I want to focus on this relationship between the Taliban and China. This is not new, although it's maybe just newly being discussed. China has played a long role in the Taliban and even equipping them with instruments of war.
Yes, this goes back more than 2 decades. So before 9/11, China was supplying telecom equipment to the Taliban. They did that in the wake of that horrific event. But also during the insurgency, China was selling small arms, including anti-aircraft missiles, to the Taliban, and they were used against American and NATO forces. So China was on the side of basically committing an act of war against the United States because those arms were used to kill Americans.
It's not like this was a secret. This was known, but many American leaders of both political parties have kind of ignored this fact.
Yes, they have. What they tried to do was to entice China to better behavior. But in doing that, we've had a series of presidents who just looked the other way at what China's been doing. And this has convinced the Chinese, and this is just goes beyond Afghanistan, that Beijing can kill Americans and get away with it. And they've been doing this with regard to COVID-19, which they deliberately spread beyond their borders, and with China's backing of these fentanyl gangs. And that's tens of thousands of American deaths each year. We Americans got to understand the maliciousness of the Chinese system and start taking appropriate actions.
So we know that they've had, as you just mentioned, they had a kind of a long history there in Afghanistan, equipping the Taliban with small arms, rockets, missiles. What role did they play during this debacle that we call a withdrawal from Afghanistan? What was China doing behind the scenes?
Yeah, we don't know that yet, but a number of people have expressed suspicions. And part of it is, remember that the senior Taliban leaders went to the Chinese city of Tianjin for that meeting on July 28th. And we don't know exactly what was discussed, but American leaders should start asking the question, where did the Taliban get the money to prosecute the end of the war? For instance, we know that Afghan soldiers were paid by the Taliban towards the end of the war because they hadn't been paid by their own government. So the Taliban came in with hard currency and cash. And I suspect that part of that money came either directly or indirectly from China. But these are questions that we need to ask, Tony, because we have not been asking these difficult questions for more than 2 decades.
Now, I'll be very candid. We don't know for certain because there have been statements made that much of the military material that was left behind by the United States, some put a price tag of 82, 85 billion dollars. Many said that, or some reports have said that it was demilitarized. It was some destroyed. Are you concerned that there may be some stuff left behind that will then be passed on to the Chinese, where they can reverse engineer or gain information that they did not have previously about our military capabilities?
Well, certainly, because there have been estimates that 20% of that material has now been sent over to China. And this would be consistent with what we know in the region. So, for instance, after the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound, we lost a sophisticated helicopter. And that helicopter, the parts, what was left of it, was sent by Islamabad to Beijing for analysis. And although, people may say, well, of course, the Chinese know what a Humvee looks like, but also they've got some other equipment, and they were able to see just how well this stuff performs. So this is important for Beijing to learn, and we left that behind. And we should never have allowed for that to happen, even if it were partially disabled. And by the way, Tony, we've seen these pictures of American equipment rolling with Taliban drivers and Taliban fighters in the back. So we didn't do a very good job of making sure that this stuff couldn't be used again.
Yeah, it's quite frankly unbelievable, if you ask me, that we left the country with all of this. And maybe some of it was inoperable, but certainly, as you've pointed out, we've seen the pictures. Some of that stuff was rolling. Let's talk, Gordon Chang, about the incentive for China to enter into this relationship. And it appears that they're playing the long game because they've been at this for a while. What is the motivation of China to align itself with Afghanistan and the Taliban?
There are a number of things. First of all, Afghanistan is one of China's 14 land borders. So they want to make sure that that one is secure. They don't want Afghanistan to be used as a refuge for Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and others who have been brutally persecuted in China. They want Afghanistan's minerals. We had President Biden 2 weeks ago issue that executive order that set a target of half of all American vehicles by 2030 should be electric powered. Well, that requires lithium. It requires rare earth minerals. Afghanistan has more lithium than any other country in the world. So clearly China wants that. They also have that lease to that big copper mine, which they haven't been able to exploit, but they certainly would like to get the operations going there. And one other thing that people don't normally talk about, and that is China would like Afghanistan to be part of its land bridge to the Arabian Sea. China wants to avoid the Malacca Straits, which is a choke point. And so if they were able to tame the country, they would be able to build roads and connect to Iran and get to the Arabian Sea. So that's important for them as well.
So, Gordon, what you've just laid out, certainly the concern here from the United States from an economic standpoint, China has a lot to gain from access to the rare minerals that are there in Afghanistan. But from a military defense perspective, should the United States be concerned about that?
Well, we certainly should, because we know that before 9/11, the Taliban allowed Afghanistan to be used as a base for al-Qaeda for attacking the United States. And the Taliban is going to do that again. We hear people in the Biden administration say, oh, the Taliban is going to be different this time because they want the legitimacy from the international community. Well, the Taliban wants legitimacy, but not from the international community. They want legitimacy with other terrorists. And of course, there are many of them in Afghanistan. And the Taliban's got to be worried that they will lose fighters to, for instance, ISIS-Khorasan, ISIS-K. So we can be sure that there is going to be Afghanistan as a haven for terrorists once more. and that we will once again have to deal with this because we are going to be attacked. One thing that this has done, the rapid collapse of the Afghan government has energized terrorists around the world, including terrorists in Pakistan. And this means that the United States is going to bear the brunt of a new wave of terrorism.
Gordon Chang, let me ask you this question beyond Afghanistan. I mean, this debacle, this display of weakness, however you want to describe it, it can't be good. I totally disagree with the president saying that this was a exceptional success. It was a failure. I had former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the program last week talking about this. When you look at the dominoes that fall, when you display weakness on the international stage, talking about China, where does this put Taiwan?
This puts Taiwan at risk. And the reason I think is because, first of all, we know what Beijing propaganda was saying. You know, even while Kabul was falling, they talked about how the United States would never defend Taiwan. And Beijing propaganda said that when the Chinese invaded, and they used when, the U.S. would bug out. So clearly, we have seen since then, in those last couple of weeks, China step up military provocations in areas adjacent to Taiwan, and that's more pressuring of the island republic. There's another place, though, that is also of critical importance to the U.S., and this is a really horrible story for us, and that is India. India was moving much closer to the U.S., into America's camp, working with us in what's called the Quad, which are the four countries, Japan, Australia, India, and the U.S. Well, now America's friends in New Delhi have been disheartened by what they saw in Afghanistan. And there is no more move in the part of India to work closely with the United States, which means that India is going to cozy up with Russia and may even make an accommodation with China. Remember, China has troops deep into Indian-controlled territory in Ladakh, and there's also the encroachments in Sikkim, which are part of India. So we could lose one of the most important countries in the world, especially as we go forward. India will be the world's most populous nation, if it isn't already. India is powerful. It has a lot of friends and a lot of influence in that region. And for us, this is a loss that'll take us decades to recover.
So Gordon, is it safe to say that the Taliban may not be the biggest winner in the U.S. and its withdrawal from Afghanistan, but it's actually China that is the big winner?
I would think that China is the big winner because it has been able to use this from a propaganda point of view to tar the image of the U.S. And we Americans never pay very much attention about propaganda. But for China, this is really important. And what China's been able to do is to send out really two messages. One of them is what we just talked about to Taiwan and to others, saying the U.S. is not a reliable ally. And the second is a message to Americans that America is completely incapable and is not able to stand up to China. This is part of China's intimidation campaign, because we've seen these intimidation themes, especially over the last year. And China was able to magnify them in the wake of the fall of Kabul. And when you look at the complete failure of the U.S. military, the U.S. intelligence community, and the national security apparatus centered on the White House, China is making a powerful case.
I would think that would go beyond even countries like India that we're developing those relationships with. I would have to think that this is going to impact our relationship with some of our historic allies. If there is another 9/11 type incident and we've got to rally global support, a coalition to go after terrorism, some of these countries may think twice before they follow American leadership.
Yes, well, we know about the problems in Western Europe. I mean, in the British Parliament, this is a special relationship. Our closest ally, decade in and decade out, had this rant session, basically in the wake of the fall of Kabul, talking about the U.S. as an unreliable ally and the complete failure in Washington. And that is a warning for us because, President Biden has said so many times, we need to work in conjunction with our allies and all the rest of it. And now our allies are looking at us and saying, who are these Americans? So this undercuts the president's own strategy in a way which is fundamental.
Yes. And that music we're about to hear is a warning to us that we're out of time. Gordon Chang, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Tony.